Okay, we are live. Thank you guys for tuning in on the web, our internet friends connected via mobile. Today we're going to talk about some of the topics that we kicked around last month, including object-oriented programming, the Moose tool module for Perl, what that is and how that works. And we're going to talk about the hackathon that we have coming up. I'm pleased that I was able to attend today. This is Tommy Butler. Joining us today is Pratik and John. John stepped out for a moment, but he also helps run the group with me. And I'm eager to hear some of the stuff that he has to say, given that he wasn't with us last month. And here he is. John, I sent you an invite.
I got it on my phone.
Cool. So if you're here in the room with me, please mute your microphone and speakers. You won't need them.
I did not bring my headset.
Well, you don't need to.
That works out a lot better, actually.
Actually, first we're going to start out with object-oriented programming, what that is. I can't recall what her name was last month who was here. She only came in because there was another class that was closed. And she said she thought she might stop by this month. Not quite sure. But she asked that we talk about Moose a little bit, which is cool because it's an important thing to talk about. If you're working with Perl, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the projector up here since I'm not using that monitor here in the classroom. Go ahead and turn that off. So we get to listen to the projector go up. So also, John, we've been talking a little bit about the One Perl per Child project as well.
Yep.
Did you get the chance to look at that page, the opbc.org page? Quick, pull it up, opbcproject.org.
Yeah.
Why, yes.
It's been
And glad you asked. That's a great question. Anyway, we'll circle back to that. Object-oriented programming. Do you use object-oriented programming? Yeah. When people ask about object-oriented programming, what that is, if I had to summarize that, I would say that, typically in programming, we think of programming as telling a computer to do. We think of it as telling a computer to do a list of things, perform a list of functions, and do stuff. But object-oriented programming approaches things in a way that enables us to do more, to program more effectively, to do things in a better way. And that's by modeling our programs based on the way that we interact with our world. Instead of interacting with a machine and giving it a list of instructions to do, we write programs where we take our ideas and we model them into classes, types of things. We call these instantiations of which we call them objects, and objects do things. It's like the world that we live in. We have little animals, some of them bark, some of them purr and meow, some of them scratch, some of them bite. There are people, there's ATM machines, there are all kinds of things that do stuff in our world, and that's kind of, and because the world presents us with problems, it's easier to approach our problems when we model them after that kind of environment, and that's what object-oriented programming does. It has some fancy terms, like encapsulation, for example, polymorphism, inheritance. What those mean, I'll talk about them in just a second. But these fancy words are part of the traditional object-oriented mindset and design paradigm. Now, I need to qualify this whole talk by, again, like I said last month, stating that I'm not an expert, but I will give you the high-level view of object-oriented programming and Moose. And next month we'll dig in a little deeper, because Moose has a lot of awesome things that have been added just recently. I mean, there's a new release this November, middle of last month. So it's not like old hat. They're still moving on it, and there's some nifty things. One of which I don't know how long ago was introduced. I'm showing my naivete, but there are triggers, so that when you set an attribute in an object, when that attribute gets set, it calls a function or a bit of code that you predefined. And because Moose is so unbelievably flexible, you can feed that trigger other Moose objects on which it might operate. And Moose, kind of like VBIX class, is one of those things that I would call a mind screw, because it screws with you in that it changes the way that you look at things, because it gives you so much extra power that you never really knew you needed. And again, I'm rambling a little bit, but we'll circle back to that. So touching on object-oriented facets and what object orientation in programming is, I've got the Wikipedia page open here for object-oriented programming. And right here, we're talking about, let's see, I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the words that I talk about here. They talk about encapsulation, composition, inheritance, delegation, polymorphism, open recursion, the dynamic dispatch, message passing, and so forth. So objects and classes, what is that? In object-oriented programming, a class is basically, well, in Perl at least, it's a file of code. I'm not going to make it complicated or make it unbelievable, glorify it beyond what it really needs to be. It's a file that has code in it. And the code there, you can actually pack more than one class into a file. It's not generally something that you would see, but a class is basically that file, all of the things that it contains as far as its variables and its subroutines in Perl speak. Now, when you bring that class to life, it's called creating an object or instantiating the class. And you can make as many objects from that class as you want. So that file is expected to give you all of the things that an object should have in object-oriented programming. It should have attributes and methods. Though that's basic 101, an object must have. It has to have attributes, it has to have methods. What are those things? Attributes are characteristics of the object, and methods are things that it can do. So if we were going to make a cat object, the cat object would have attributes like fur, teeth, and things that it can do. Yes, claws. And what are things that cats do? Well, it can meow and scratch and go viral on the internet. So go viral might be
Play the piano.
Play the piano, sing, scare the dog. But so those things that the cat could do, we call those methods. Now, the cool thing about
I have a counter for how many lives they have left.
Right, and objects will objects, you can implement counters, you can do all kinds of cool stuff. Now, some of the other things that it talks about here in this page and that object-oriented design patterns encompass or incorporate, one of them is encapsulation. And encapsulation helps you make better code. The reason why it helps you make better code, why would you anybody want to hazard a guess why or how does encapsulation help us make better code? Encapsulation first is the practice of squirreling away, hiding away from the end user what you're doing. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain kind of thing. And instead, giving the user a list of things that they can make your object do. So if you give somebody a Perl library that's object-oriented, and you say, here's this library from the CPAN, you can download and install this module. When you do, you can use it in your code, and this is a cat. You can ask it to purr, you can ask it to scratch, and when you ask it to scratch, you can pass it an argument for how many times, or a target, which might be a human object, or another cat object, a couch, maybe, that you want to destroy. But what the expectation for encapsulation as a design principle is that nobody ever cuts the cat open to see how the cat is going to scratch you. Nobody, how does that work? Let me pry this baby open. Okay, I see how the muscles flex and the claws are extended. Well, Perl will let you, via Moose, and it's also the classic object-oriented system for Perl. They both let you pop objects open and look at them. Other languages are much less tolerant. Java, for example, if you say something's private or what have you, at runtime, you can't pop that object open and look at its attributes or what kind of data it contains or the data structures that it uses to hold all of that. Perl and Python also let you do things at runtime that are, Java would consider blasphemous. It lets you pop that encapsulation open. But encapsulation is good because it lets you always go back to that module, fix bugs, go back to that code, refactor the code, change things the way they work, make them better, fix bugs, make it more efficient. As long as the user who uses that code can make the cat say meow, they don't care. They don't care about the other stuff that's going on in the background, and they shouldn't. They shouldn't have to worry about it. As long as it's doing a good job of meowing, it's a good kitty and deserves a treat. Let's tackle inheritance next. Inheritance is the principle of saying, let's say we have an animal class. Well, a cat would be, you could say in your cat class, you could tell it that I am an animal, and therefore I inherit everything that an animal does. So in your animal class, you could say that an animal, let's see, what are the eats? Poops. John says poops. What are characteristics? We could say that animal, what is it? It's a mammal, or it's a reptile. It's extinct or not extinct, yes, no, Boolean. So you have some basic animal things, but then in the cat object, you could say that it's a subclass of the animal class. And the subclass is basically just saying that it inherited from the parent class. So if the parent class animal can eat, when you create a cat object, by virtue of the fact that it's an animal, even if you don't say that it can eat in the cat class, simply by virtue of the fact that it is an animal, it can eat. And it can poop. And it can do other things that the animal class can do, and that's inheritance. There are other things, one of which I would call roles. Well, okay. I don't call it roles. Object-oriented programming calls it roles, which is instead of like inheritance, because a class can inherit from many other classes, which can inherit from other classes. You can have a very big lineage for your class, and because it can inherit from multiple parentages, is that a word? Yeah. Parentages. You can have it inherit multiple behaviors and attributes and methods, and you can override those kinds of those things as well in your class, so that if an animal sleeps, but your cat sleeps differently, you can tell it, I'm going to override the sleep method from the animal class with my own sleep method. And in my own sleep method, I do this instead. Go ahead, John.
Credit cards?
Credit cards. What about?
So, if the animal metaphor seems overwhelming, because we know about animals, we know a lot about animals, and they can be, yeah, there's almost too many attributes, and methods and things to classify. Simplify the model, credit cards, right? All credit cards have similar things, whether you're a MasterCard or a Visa or a Diners or American Express. You got a form factor, plastic, not square, rectangular, a size,
Magnetic
you
strip.
got a magnetic strip, you have printed, because you no longer emboss them, numbers, you got expiration dates, and maybe you have a check, right? So you can reorganize that into inheritance.
You can say we have a credit card class, and then subclasses might be Visa, MasterCard, whatever. And you can also bring roles into play. Roles are really cool, where you can say that this credit card does a certain thing. What's a certain thing that this debit card does? Well, it's also an ATM, it's also a check card. It can also do all of the things like support the PIN option, or you can get cash back from a debit type transaction versus credit.
Built-in withdrawal limit.
So a role, for example, in the credit card thing would be, it does something. When you think about roles versus inheritance, a lot of people who have gone through and refactored a big, huge bunch of code are folks who will advocate for roles, because unscrewing and peeling back all the layers of inheritance and exactly how those inheritance orders are resolved, because there's a resolution order for inheritance. For example, if I'm a subclass of animal and I'm a subclass of something else, and both of which have a conflicting method. Let's say I'm an animal and I'm also a creature, and animals and creatures both can, let's say, breathe. Then in the subclass, well, it's up to the language to say, all right, well, who wins? Which breathe do I execute if I call breathe on that object? So there's a resolution order, and we won't get into MRO or method resolution order at all. But yes, so roles can be very helpful when you're designing things. Instead of saying, is this thing able to do something because it's a child of X? Instead, you can say, it can do something by virtue of the fact that it does a police officer role. In other words, it patrols, or it does a patrol, or it does a security guard function.
Yeah.
It does I don't know, stuff. Name your role, and as long as it does a certain thing, then you can compose that role into your class, which is kind of what's under my cursor here on the screen, composition, which is another fundamental facet of object-oriented design. Composition is basically what happens when you have an object and you bring it to life, and you've applied all of its inheritance, all of its roles, everything. When it comes to life, all of that is resolved, all of it's brought to life in this object, and that's composition time. When all the roles are composed into it, all the inheritance is applied, that's composition. And let's see, further on down, I'm not going to talk about delegation. Further on down here, it talks about open recursion, point 1.7 or 1.7 here. Open recursion basically means that an object in some languages, Java, JavaScript, Perl, Python, they all have the notion that an object can call its own methods if it wants to. For example, a cat can scratch itself if it wants to. So in Perl, if you have an object, it can say, it can call itself, which is really helpful because if that object has a private method that you don't want to expose to other people, let's say when you call the scratch method on this cat object, a lot of things go on in the background, like the flexing of muscles and the sensory functions and the functions that go up and down the spinal cord, the messages that get passed to and from the brain. All of those would be different methods inside that cat class. And the cat, when you tell the cat to scratch, it needs to be able to call all of those private things and do all of that stuff in the background. And because it can call its own methods, that's the principle of open recursion right there. So there's the last thing, and one of my favorite things about object-oriented programming is polymorphism. And it tends to get less attention than it deserves, in my opinion. And polymorphism is basically saying that at runtime, when an object is called, it's up to that object to decide how it's going to respond to a given input, and that it should be able to respond intelligently. So if you create an object and you ask it to do something, you want that object to be able to respond with a number when you expect a number, or with a string if you're asking for a string, or with a list if you call it in list context. For example, if you say, object, go get me those things, you'd be disappointed if you know that it has 3 things but it only gave you 1, because it was programmed to only ever give you 1 thing. The object, by virtue of the fact that it follows best object-oriented practices, should have been designed to be polymorphic, and based on the context in which it was called, it should return the type of information, the amount of information, all based on the context. It should return the appropriate stuff. So polymorphism, almost like, just call it good customer service. So that if somebody asks you for, dinner and a show, you make sure that you make the best food and show the best movie that person wants based on the input that they came in. If they show up and they tell you about themselves and they say they're a big Star Trek fan, if good customer service would mean that when they ask for their show, that you show them, something with Captain James Kirk, and not something with John Wayne, for example. That's polymorphism. Moose is metaclass programming in Perl. Metaclass programming is basically the ability to take object-oriented programming deeper, such that objects can mess around with their own identities. And Perl's meta-object system class mop is what's the underpinnings for Moose. And that by virtue of Moose's meta capabilities, when you create an object in Moose, you can do things like mess around with the actual definitions of what that class does, and at runtime override things and change things on the fly. So it becomes extremely powerful when, while you're running and operating a program, maybe as part of an effort to be polymorphic, you change yourself as an object. You change things about yourself while you're running in order to meet the demands of what was asked. Crazy concept, extremely powerful, lots of fun. And it's one of those things that when you need it, you really need it. And then when you need it, you reach for it and it's there. It's a good feeling to know, wow, I was able to do that because by virtue of the fact that I could mess around with my own attributes, and on a much lower level than just a getter or setter. Those are called accessors, by the way. So, Pratik, how to use object orientation at work in your programming?
There's other situations that sometimes soft calls when you're trying to basic and
It's okay, I'll repeat it. So Pratik said basically he uses it as it's needed. Are there any particular, do you write object-oriented code, or are you a consumer of object-oriented? library.
When you come down, you just depend on the situation.
What out of all that laundry list of things that I talked about object-oriented programming, and I just really, really barely scratched the surface. What are some of the things that you like about object orientation as design pattern?
Polymorphism. There's a good analogy that I like to use when I'm talking about polymorphism. Shapes, rectangle, square. It's how you determine the area. Sometimes you don't need to, if it's defined in one place, you don't have to re-implement it in another place. We're using inheritance and polymorphism at the same time. Just to make things a little easier.
Well, that's the whole point of successful design. And if you look there at the Wikipedia page about object-oriented programming, the sources that it cites, it says that object-oriented programming started appearing in the late 50s. So it's not a new thing, but it's still, whenever a new language comes out, it's one of those first things that it likes to brag about. I'm object-oriented. You know, I'm a forward-thinking object-oriented programming language, because a lot of languages still aren't object-oriented, and some of them will never be object-oriented. They have no intention of becoming object-oriented, like shell scripting, for example. That'd be really interesting to create shell scripts or write an object-oriented shell scripting thing. Maybe PowerShell tries to be object-oriented. Does it try to be object-oriented? Yeah, probably so, because it's messing around with all of those Windows things that it calls objects.
All the .NET libraries.
Yeah. But Unix PowerShell scripting isn't and probably never will be object-oriented. It's possible, though. Things like systemd are changing the world. So it's still possible. You know, Elvis lives somewhere in some universe.
Yeah.
No, but it is, object orientation is not necessarily new, but it's still hip and cool in that it's so useful, nobody wants to really do without it. Unless you are writing things like shell scripts, which are purely lists of instructions for a computer to execute, and that's all you ever intended it to be. So, scratching the surface of Moose, you can come to metacpan.org and look at the Moose documentation here. About 5 years ago, Brian D. Foy of Perl fame wrote something for the Perl review. And that was, he says that it's not a tutorial, it's not an introduction, but he's just going to cover some things and kind of see how it goes. So he talks about the things that he likes about Moose. Now, in Perl, traditional classic Perl object orientation, if you want to create an object-oriented library, you have to go to the trouble of doing all kinds of stuff that other languages give you for free, and for that, sometimes Perl is made fun of. But you could also contend that Perl objects are extremely lightweight and fast because it takes some, you know, like C, a lot of it is manual. And if you do want to do object orientation in Perl, like in the classic way, for example, every object, you need to be able to create a new one of it. And so if you want to make an object-oriented Perl library in the classic way, you have to create your own constructor. And a constructor is basically saying, this is the way that you make a new object of this class. The constructor method in pretty much every single object-oriented language that gives it to you for free is new. You call .new or arrow new, or else you say new and then the name of the class. For example, my pet shop equals new pet shop, or pet shop arrow new, or pet shop .new, depending on whatever language you're using. In Perl, you have to open up your library and create the subroutine named new, and because of the fact that you are making an object-oriented library, you say it's a class when, you know, it's just really a glorified subroutine. Moose takes this to a new level, though. At the top of the screen that you're looking at, you can see the that Brian has written this code, package pet shop use moose, semicolon 1, or 1 semicolon. The reason why it has the 1 semicolon is that in Perl, when you use a library, it's expected to always return true, a true value. So you'll typically see that at the end of any Perl class. But what you don't see here in Brian's library is what makes it so awesome. You don't see here sub new, sub destroy. You don't see that stuff in here because by virtue of the fact that he said use moose, you get it all for free. Look at the next paragraph here where it says in petshop.pl, use petshop. So he's going to use the code that he made up here in the first stanza, and he says call the new method on it. Well, where did that come from? It came from Moose, because Moose loves you. He gave it to you for free, or she, or it gave it to you for free. The Moose gave you a free new object. Anytime you want one, you just call arrow new on your new Moose class. Now, Brian, in this paragraph, intentionally creates some code that's going to fail under strict, but under normal circumstances won't fail. The reason why it wouldn't normally fail is because this is perfectly legitimate Perl right here that I've highlighted, and as long as you don't use Moose. The reason why is because Perl lets you declare variables like this, but if you turn on the strict pragma and the warnings pragma, Perl will complain if you don't scope your variables. And so when he runs that code, it shows an error. Global symbol pets requires explicit package name because he didn't scope the variable with a my declaration in front of it. Perl puked. And he said, well, how did that happen? He said, not only do I get the constructor for free, but I got strict and warnings too. So thanks to Moose, he says, I'm having to do less work. And it's true. Turn on strict and warnings if you don't already turn on strict and warnings, and you'll find out that you can write much better programs. So what about attributes? What about attributes? He says in his pet shop class that if you use Moose, you get this little coolism right here. Has. With a has declaration, you can say what your pet shop has, what your class has. If it's a kitty, you can say it has claws. Right here he says, my pet shop has pets. You can say what it is, if it's writable, or if it's read-only, if it's lazy, if it has a trigger. You can say if it's required, or if it's a default, or you can specify default value. You can specify a builder. We'll get to all of that. What does this mean? In Moose, there's a type system where you can say that my attribute has to be a certain type. You can say that I have a counter, and because it's a counter, we kind of know that it needs to be an integer, don't we? Because a counter isn't going to be a floating point value, and not usually. It's a counter, not a gauge. And so since it's a counter, it's going to be an integer. So you can say is a int. Right here where it says is array ref, Brian is telling his class that basically the pet shop has a pets attribute that is rewritable. It's read and write, which means you can set it and get it at any time in the runtime of your program. And it's an array reference, which means it's going to hold a list of things. It can hold several things. So down here in his program, he does this, where he creates a new pet shop, and he gets the list of pets that are in it right here. It's an empty list, obviously, because he didn't put any pets in it. So you see this when he runs the program, nothing. Now, when you create an object, if you've created an accessor or an attribute, like pets, because he said, because he created that pets accessor, he can stuff things in it at creation time. So when he creates a new pet shop object right here in this, where you see highlighted, he gives it a list of cat, bird, or 2 cats, a bird, and a dog. Not terribly exciting yet, but now when he asks for the cats, he has the correct output. It says what he's got in it. Now, he shows an example of how to make it fail by sending it the wrong type. Here, he's altered his program to say, where I've highlighted the code here, instead of passing it a list, he passed it a hash type. He passed it a hash reference instead of a list reference, with the curly brackets instead of the square ones. And because he passed it the wrong type, when it runs, you can see here that it failed because it didn't pass the value type constraint. This is a real monumental thing for people who are programming in Perl who wants to, to enforce types. Because Perl on its own it doesn't have it's not strongly typed or strictly typed language. It doesn't ask you for types. But if you want, you can tell your Moose class that you can tell it that it's a certain type. Its attribute is a certain type. And one of the cool things that you're going to see here in a minute is that you can tell it that in that array ref that only strings are allowed. So basically, if you give me a list, the only things that are allowed in that list are strings. One of my favorite things about Moose is that you can tell it that it's a list, and the list only accepts objects, and the objects have to be pets. It's awesome. To me, I'm sorry, but that's so cool to say that I have, or for example, I have a customer and it has to be a human because, aliens, sorry, but we discriminate and aliens aren't allowed here. I'm sure that will make some people very upset, but at least in this example, no, extraterrestrials need buy pets here. What are the aliens that eat cats? Alf. Alf always ate cats, and that's why we don't serve your kind here, Alf.
Come to my house.
One of the things that I wanted to also explain is, that I'm showing you here is the required feature here for the accessor. When you create an accessor here, you can say that his name, for example, or that this pet class it has a name, it has a type. So the name is a required thing. So if you create a pet and you don't give it a name when you create it, Moose will puke and say, sorry, you're using me badly. This class was not used properly. And you can also set defaults so that the default type is an animal. Now, he hasn't defined an animal class, but you can say that, or I'm sorry, the default value for type is animal. You can say it's also the pet is a rock. Maybe it's a pet rock. You can specify default value for your thing so that, for example, if it's never defined by that person who consumed your class and made an object with it, if they never said what that accessor or attribute was supposed to hold, at least it had a default. At least you tried.
Alf was a Melmacian.
He was a Melmacian.
Came from Melmac.
I forgot about that, but I kind of almost remember him eating a cat. So here, Brian modified his program so that he's using Pet Shop. And again, by virtue of the fact that he used Pet Shop, he's got strict, he's got warnings because Pet Shop used Moose. And so he's making a bunch of pets. He made Buster, Mimi, Addie, and Poppy that were a cat, a dog. And then it looks like Poppy, we don't know what it is. We don't know what kind of pet that is. So the default is gonna fall back to being an animal instead of a cat or a dog or whatever. There are other things that you can do like auto dereference here for array refs. go ahead and, you can look at the article. Just basically Google Moose tutorial, and it'll be like the second or third result. You can get this article. Diving in a little bit more, you can see this, that he's made a pet cat subclass. He's made a cat subclass. So a cat, he's saying, is a type of pet. He's also going to make a dog subclass and a bird subclass. And you see what he's doing. He says that they still have a type, but he's saying plus type. What does the plus mean? It's an overrider. It means that it overrides the default of the other behavior that it inherited. Whenever you create a Moose class, if you want to inherit from another class, you can even inherit from another CPAN library. It doesn't have to be your own thing. You can say that I extend CGI, not PM. You can say that I extend whatever. That extends pet. This class is extending pet. This class also extends pet. And so they get everything that a pet does. They inherit from the pet. They inherit all of its attributes. But this says that the default is a dog, and this says that the default is a bird. So this time when he creates his pets right here, they have default values, because he knows that this one's going to be a bird, this one's going to be a dog, when he asks what type they are here on this line. So for a crash course into Moose, this is probably as deep as we need to dig. The accessors, that and roles. Switching over here to the documentation here for Moose, you can see that it does some other cool stuff. The biggest, coolest thing are method modifiers, in my opinion. They're probably my favorite Moose feature. You can see that right here, the after keyword that you get here with Moose. If you're using Moose, you can say before, after, around, and you can say, by virtue of the fact that I'm extending a class, I have a given method from a parent class, and because I have that given method from a parent class, you can start modifying what that method does with the after, around, before. Start looking at this documentation for more examples of what you can do with that. The extends also takes other arguments. You can specify a minimum version, or you can say that it extends multiple things at one time. It extends this class, minimum version that, extends this class, or specifically that version. You can also say that it does certain things, so that if you want to compose roles into your class, you can use Moose classes that have been created as roles using the with keyword here. A Moose role works just like a Moose up here. We'll go flip back over to Brian's code. It works just like this, where it says Moose, only you say use Moose : role, and then all of the things that you put in it, all of the subroutines, are not methods, they're roles. And when you say, instead of extends here, you just say with instead of extends, and you get that role and all of the stuff that can happen in a Moose role. One of the key things that you need to be aware of with Moose roles is that you can't instantiate a role, so you need to design properly. And if you ever find yourself trying to make a new instance of a role, you're doing it wrong. And you need to go back and think again. And that's happened to me more than once, where I'm like, oh shoot, I need to make a new one of those. No, I did it wrong because I'm trying to make a new role. I'm trying to make a new does something. And you don't make a new does something. You just do it. So method modifiers, accessors. Then the last thing is the meta. The meta stuff about a Moose, the meta programming, or meta object programming. means that you treat, let's use the words of Brian D. Foy. Up here at the top of the article, he said it really well. Moose is based on the idea of meta-object programming, or MOP, which means that the object system itself is itself an object. So you can take a Moose class, call its meta method, and mess around with its actual method declaration inside of the method on the fly, adding methods to a class, saying, "Oh, guess what, class? You can also do this now because I'm running, and while I'm running, in order to make sure that I'm showing the right movie to my, to the guy at my house, I'm going to modify my library right now. I'm going to modify my movie library right now. Go and get a movie and add it to my shelf so that I've got extra stuff." Moose lets you screw around with these objects in ways that you've never been able to touch objects before in other languages. Python caught on. You can do meta-class programming in Python. You can also do it in Smalltalk. But not a lot of languages let you do meta-object programming. So Perl is really kicking it with Moose. That's why a lot of people get excited about Moose, because of the extra capabilities it unlocks. That is more advanced, though, than we're going to go tonight as far as Moose is going. If there's any questions, go ahead and send them to the mailing list, and we can answer those. Did you have any comments, John? Because, I mean, it was kind of like a really quick run-through. Any inaccuracies you want to correct?
No. The biggest thing that I get out of OO is, as a general approach, is the pushing complexity down. Because you talk about abstraction, but abstraction is like a tactic, where pushing the complexity down is like a strategy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So just to mention that.
Yeah. Let me change what I'm sharing here in the Hangout. Let me bring up a terminal, for example. All right. Here in my terminal, my computer may have just crashed. It's not sure what to do about this screen sharing business. Can you still see my terminal, guys, in the feed when I type this?
Yeah, I see it now.
ASDF.
Yep.
See that? Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Actually, now if this is in my program, since my actual program isn't going to run Moose because it's not a class, I'm not going to use Moose here. But let's say I was going to use an object-oriented library. When you are opening files in Perl, there are so many millions of ways to make mistakes. Encodings, I/O layers. Is it, did I clobber my file? Did I get a file lock? Did I write it atomically? Perl, you can make a lot of mistakes, and it's not just opening files. You can do this in any language with any number of tasks. But for example, I'm trying to show you, an example of what John was talking about, pushing the complexity down. If you want to write a file, you can use this particular Perl library right here, file util. You can just do this. mean, how much easier does it get than that, right? Or there. So now you have the contents of a file. You just loaded them in to this variable. And it pushed that library did all of that heavy lifting for you. It made sure that it did all of the right things in the background, like locking, encoding, making sure that you made all of the right choices and all of the right options were used, that it was platform independent, that it's going to work on Windows, that it's going to work on Unix, no matter what kind of path you might pass it, no matter what content you might pass to send to the file, it's going to encode it correctly. That's an example of what John was talking about. So, John, did you get a chance to look at opcproject.org?
.org?
opcproject.org.
Yes. Sorry. I was having a .io flashback. So everything's .io now, right?
Is it?
Yeah, if you're hip hop and happening.
Hip hop and happening and hip and hipster.
Yeah, you're right. You want venture capital? You gotta have a .io. So yes, one of the things that I needed to look for, because I read something a couple of weeks back that was talking about Perl 6 and about how different Perl 6 is than Perl 5.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, you can program Perl 6 like a regular procedural language. You can program it like an object-oriented language. You can program it like a functional language, and that it accepts and adapts to those different ways of using it, which is crazy to me. But one of the things that that I like about Perl is that you can start with something very, very simple, right? You can start with a procedural script that does one thing, hello world, right? And then you can grow all the way up to full line of business enterprise stack, really complicated stuff. So I think that we're not ready to teach anybody Perl 6 because we're not, that's not our stock and trade. I certainly am not up to speed on Perl 6. But it sounds super, super interesting. So not saying that we need to be teaching Perl 6 instead, but that's certainly not out there, right? That certainly is a unique opportunity to start somebody off with a language they can go more places to, right? I don't know if it's ready, or for teaching the kids for that use case. So I want to mention that. And the other thing is, we talked about this a couple of meetings back about the delivery system. And having the courseware basically made up on an image, ready to go, that people could download. That seems a viable method. Us hosting something, certainly going to have limitations.
Yeah, resources, namely.
Yeah. Now, I don't expect that this will be, a booking.com level traffic site. So I don't. I think we could quite easily fund, a droplet or something to do this on, right?
Mm-hmm.
But um, one of the things that seems to make projects more useful to people is when they are more involved with it. So that's one of the reasons why I think I like the courseware that you can throw onto a Raspberry Pi, and then it's the server for a classroom. And then if you need to update, add more courseware, then you can, you know, go out and basically do a script, pull down, new directories, and then your web application can just see those and offer them up as a choice. Um, the big the big sticking point to me seems to be where are we going to get the courses, right? Because we can go to iStock and get clip art to dress it up. We can hire a freelance designer all day long to make it look pretty, so that we don't have to burn cycles on that and focus on the content. But we have to focus on the content, right? We have to decide on how it's going to go. So there's just some technical issues I think that we need to burn through. The last question is, I think we need to start a page of basically competing products, right? So we need to go out and see if there's anybody who's already doing this. Just because we don't know about it doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's probably number one, is to go out and find, like Code Academy. That's an easy one, right?
Mm-hmm. There's code.org, but it's kind of a toy, It doesn't. I mean, my son uses it.
Yeah.
Jesse uses it for school, and but it's almost like a game. He's not really learning. From what I've seen, it's like
Zuckerberg and Google and Gates basically funded that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Code.org was where the president sat down and wrote a program, right? But it can't be that deep because he doesn't have that much time, right? So,
no, it's not. But it's not.
But that's what I want to do. Is like we can put up code.org, we can go, nope, not what we're trying to do, or it's not aligned, with our goals. And I think through that process, we'll be able to clarify what our goals are, because we'll go, that's close, but it's not right in this way. Right? So that's, I think, the next task that we need to do as a group is like find 5 sites each, and then if somebody else, finds 5, then and 2 of them overlap, go find 2 more, right? Find 5 unique sites that are trying to do the same thing, even if it's not the same language, right? Teaching coding. And then whatever the good parts of those are, bring those back, reproduce them, seal them whole cloth if they're not commercial, right? Because if this stuff is open source or it's open license, which is what we will be the same way, Genius doesn't reinvent the wheel. Genius borrows the wheel, makes a better wheel, right?
Right.
And then lords their great wheel over everybody else.
Lords it.
Yeah. I got a wheel. Look at my wheel. So that's my input. Is that I think it all boils down to the courseware, because there's actually lots of ways to package it up and deliver it. So I think that's the easiest part of the thing. The hardest part is going to be actually building something that's engaging and meaningful. Because there are other people trying to do this. They've got money. They sit around. That's their job. Is to how to do this. So.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not. It's for me. It's not a contest to win. It'd be nice, you know, but for me, it's a gift that I want to give. It sounds sappy when I say Perl has given so much to me, and I want to give back to Perl, and I want to give Perl to other people. But it's true. Perl's been of great benefit to me in many ways. It's something that's benefited me enough that I get excited about it, and not just because I'm a geek, but I get excited about Perl because of the doors that it's opened up for me, the ways that it's helped me out in my career as a professional, and how it's also helped me do cool things in my spare time. I want to be able to give that to other people. When you give somebody a skill like programming in Perl, they can take that to the bank. And when you're talking about kids, that means that they're getting skills that let them compete in today's marketplace for jobs that pay money instead of peanuts. The kind of jobs that if you're a dad, that you want your kid to have.
Totally. So it needs to be of value to them. That's the watermark. So how can we?
I've got a few test subjects, as mentioned before.
Right. So I want to go see what other people are doing, so that we have an idea of what if what we're doing is going to be of value. Basically.
Right.
So I think that's just a process. Go through it, come back, got a list of the sites, got what we like about them, what we didn't like about them.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll send something about it out on the mailing list. There's also something else that I wanted to throw out. I was working on putting up the meeting announcement today on dfw.pm.org. It's very vanilla. I mean, it'd be fun maybe to have a little bit more than just a black and white website, and maybe have a little design contest, so submit and take votes, and whoever wins the popular vote gets to have their design on the for dfw.pm.org.
Cool.
So there's that. I'll send information about that out as well. As far as the hackathon goes, that I promised that we would talk about, the server is built. It's ready to run virtual machines. It has a mechanical issue that I've got to fix with the cooling. But after that, I'm going to start creating and working on a virtual machine image that I'll distribute to other people. It'll be kind of like a reference. People will be able to modify that, and it will contain the constraints and the environment in which the hackathon competitors will operate. Anybody who wants to be in the hackathon, they'll either get to log into a live VM, or they can get a copy of my VM image that I'll give them, and they can run it on whatever. But it'll be an open VM format, and it will have at least one or two Docker images in it that are running. The first one being a secured Perl interpreter, the second one being a basic web application that implements the basic goals of the hackathon, which is to take user input from a web page, send it to the Perl interpreter, and return the output to the web page. And as I mentioned last week, that opens up all kinds of security nightmares. But it's, I think, completely doable if it's implemented correctly, or implemented in the way that I'm proposing. I'm not sure if you got to listen to our broadcast last month, but
not all of it.
when I talked about it, basically this is the gist. It'll be a Linux environment locked down, and inside that environment it'll be running Docker with a Docker image that is the official Perl image from Docker Hub. And I'm going to alter the default settings of the Docker engine so that instead of using libcontainer, it uses liblxc, which is different. But LXC lets you enforce whitelists of system calls that a process is allowed to make. So you can say, this process, or whatever I run in this Docker image, it can make these system calls, and that's it. So you say, unless it's in this list, it can't, for example, open up network sockets. It can't go to sleep. Somebody can't type sleep 1 million, enter, or send an email basically by opening a network socket or starting a port scan. By restricting the system calls to basically nothing, all you do is you give it the opportunity to run Perl code and execute basic Perl statements, maybe do some read-only file open, fcntl calls.
Do they have a repository of common lists?
Secure.
Yeah.
I don't. I've only seen
an
example of one. I've just only seen one. And the thing is that the virtual machine is going to have that Docker image in it when I hand it off, and it'll also have another Docker image, and in that image is going to be a Mojalicious app. The Mojalicious app is what's going to run and take network requests on port foo, whatever, X, and then it will send commands to that Perl interpreter. Basically, what it's going to do is it's going to make a Docker call, and it's going to fire that Docker image up with some arguments, and the arguments will be the Perl code. And I'm not really worried about trying to sanitize it, because as long as that is locked down, and as long as you're only accepting, a certain size of input, then I'm okay. That's the assumption. And I think it's a pretty safe one. If I was doing this in an enterprise environment, what I would do is I would have this virtual machine doing this stuff, load balance. I'd have like 1,000 instances of them load balanced.
Yep.
And then every 15 minutes I would destroy it and redeploy a new image. So that if somebody, or maybe even on a smaller image, so even if somebody did manage to break out of the Docker container running the Perl app, or manage to somehow get that Perl interpreter to execute something malicious, and I don't see how it would be possible if you're making sure that it can't do things that are, system calls that are unallowed. The only thing I can think of is maybe making the machine attack itself by doing some really, 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 really extensive, heavy prime number calculation, for example, and basically just bog down the CPU. In which case you can say, I'm going to wait for so long, to return before I kill it off. Say you're done. We'll just have to look at it. We'll have to look at it closely. But that's basically what I'm going to give people, is I'm going to give them a virtual machine and host the virtual machine on a public IP address that they can log into with a SSH key, and they can play with it. They can mess around with the app, and the contest is, who can do it, who can do the fastest, and who can do it and stand up to a penetration test as well. We're going to attack it. So apparently Backtrack Linux has been superseded by a newer distribution. We talked about this last month. We'll use that to go up against the application submissions and see which ones we can make them fall over or attack successfully. Also, I think maybe for fun, we say, all right, and if you don't want to do it in Perl, do it in Node.js or do it in some other way. Battle of the languages. If you don't want to do it in Perl, do it some other way. As long as you can run Perl code through it. You can run Perl code through it, and you can still participate in the hackathon. And again, for anybody who's listening in and wasn't quite sure what this was about, the reason why we're having this hackathon is for the One Perl per Child project, or OPPC project, oppcproject.org, so that we can have a website where kids get to log in and run through class, curriculum. And I think that for our curriculum, we could make basic, classes or what have you, and predefined Perl code, say, all right, type a program that does this, or X or Y. I don't know, John. We could say, please type this, and did you type that? Yes, it matches the regular expression. Okay, you did okay. We could do that, but I just don't, that isn't in the spirit of Perl. The spirit of Perl is there's more than one way to solve a problem, and if the kid approaches it differently than another kid, that doesn't mean it's the wrong answer.
Right.
We want it to it's like, okay, so do it your way. Let's see who can do it the best. Let's see who does it the fastest, That's how awesome things get discovered, not by making everybody do the same thing.
So make the final output come out on standard out, or?
Yeah, or basically, when you feed the Perl code to the Perl Docker image to evaluate the interpreter, the output is going to come back to you in a variable, the std out of that Docker call. And the std out of that Docker call, you read it and you send it back to the std out of the web app.
Or standard error, which should have the -d, right?
One thing that we also have to be aware of is what kind of things that we're sending back to the client, because you could also have somebody who says, who types Perl code in that's completely safe and perfectly legitimate for the back end, but when it gets returned, it attacks the end user's browser with JavaScript, malicious stuff. We'd have to make sure that it's all escaped and properly quoted and what have you, sanitized in that way. Any kind of templating framework like Template Toolkit lets you do that, so that if they try to return JavaScript or HTML, but there might be other ways to try to destroy a browser as well, not just HTML code.
Well, if we ask a question and it needs to return a phrase that's under 20 characters, we can limit the output coming back to under 20 characters.
Yeah. What if, somebody... There's always going to be the what if. Oh, I found out if I return this sequence of characters in their Unicode, really, really wide characters, that I can crash your browser. Yeah. Exactly.
Then congratulations.
You're the winner. And the benefit of the end product is also going to be the fact that accounts and you're going to have to log in and authenticate to it. So it's not going to be just, free for all on the internet where you can send stuff to this. You'll have to log in. You'll have to get with your account. You'll have to authenticate so we know who you are and we'll know what code you run. Just, it's up to us, I guess, to determine how long we want to retain that for forensics. If for some reason we just, we needed to audit something.
You have a so you've got a situation where anybody can go hit this web browser and get somebody else's output, right? Because if you crash your own browser, you put your program in. So if you're going to save off the code, somebody else can run it. Stands to reason they should be able to vote on that code, right? or at least
What do you
flag
mean?
it.
Oh, well,
This
the only time
crashes
I've
my
never
boat.
thought about a report breaks the user policy, the user acceptance policy, acceptable use policy. I'm not, we haven't talked about sharing code between students. Just, the objective of the hackathon is just run the code, run it against the interpreter.
Right. How would somebody else, other than the author, run the code?
It wouldn't.
So the only case of crashing the browser is the author crashing their own browser.
Yeah. But still, you don't want to let them do that.
Oh yeah, but I don't think
it's not you.
In the spirit of openness, right? So
you want to let people. You want to opt to let people destroy their browser.
Well, yeah.
Software.
But
hey, look! If I enter this, it wipes out my browser. It crashes. Check this out.
And they will have learned something. The question to me is, if you're going to save that stuff off, is it after the contest is over that it would be publicly available, or?
You're talking about the hackathon?
Yeah.
Well, the hackathon author, the rules so far as drafted, and the rules haven't been published yet because this isn't finalized yet. But the way that I have it drafted so far is, the basic requirements of the hackathon aren't that somebody be able to, you have to create a full-blown web app with a database that saves all the code. No. It's just simply run the code against this Perl interpreter with your web application, and if your web application manages to do cool stuff like connect to a database in another container, because you can't have a database unless it's containerized as well, you can use the official Postgres Docker image. And I'm going to include that in the VM in case they want to use it. They'll get a Postgres and a MySQL Docker image.
Postgres?
Yeah.
Okay.
A Postgres and a MySQL, so they can choose.
Maria.
Precisely. MariaDB.
Yeah, there was a disturbing development in Mojo a couple of months back, not too long ago, where they decided to stop using Mongo as their go-to database because they had problems with the current way they were doing it, and the direction was he didn't agree with the direction. So, because they had this thing called Mango, which was a Mojo-licious, team-written Mongo database ORM, and it was brilliant and tight. But anyway, so they used to be like Mongo and Mojo used to be like this. Now they're like that.
Now they're divergent.
So Postgres is the what they're trying to replace it with.
No.
FYI.
It makes sense. A lot of enterprise businesses, consider it to be and the way they tout it themselves, we're the enterprise database. We're the open source enterprise database alternative. MySQL doesn't bill itself that way. But
yeah.
For example, a very popular Postgres support company, if you want to buy support for your Postgres at your company, the name of that company is called Enterprise DB. You want Postgres support? Call Enterprise DB. They'll help you out. The Postgres people, So that's the thing. And incidentally, whenever I would go to the DBIX class folks and DBIC folks on IRC with DBIC issues, and I have a handful of times, they would say, "Oh, you're using MySQL." Why aren't you using Postgres? MySQL, and that's like, Mickey. Yeah. I was like, yeah, because it worked, and I've got the shell open, and I don't have to type weird stuff in the shell, and
And you can dump the database like that.
The Postgres 9.5 is out, and in beta 2 right now, and it's just screaming fast. It's just so fast, and it's got crazy cool features, and it does things the right way. Per database designers and people who develop data, using databases, they like it because it does things the way that databases are supposed to database.
The database is
Pretty databasic.
MapReduce. No SQL front ends, weirdly enough. So, yeah. Need to look at it closer, I guess.
I'm told that a lot of extensions that were previously available only as extensions have been brought into the 9.5 core for Postgres.
So, what is the best client for Postgres? I actually tried to install Postgres at the beginning of the year.
The people that I know who use Postgres on a daily basis use PG client. So
yeah, just the default.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's because you've been spoiled, Mr. MySQL Yog.
Indeed I have.
MySQL Yog is brilliant product.
Yeah.
I get along very well and fine using MySQL Shell. But bringing in MySQL Yog is really fun because it shows you how. I mean, you're like, oh, I can do that. Why did I never know I could do that? Then it'll let you look at the commands that it runs in the shell or runs against the actual shell, MySQL shell, and you're like, cool. So next time I use a shell, I know what to do. But it's a cool tool in that it shows you how to do things that you didn't know how to do otherwise. Just if you're typical MySQL shell user, some cool extra features.
You know what it also works with?
What?
Aurora.
Sleeping Beauty?
AWS is homegrown, reverse engineered RDS that's MySQL compatible. And it scales like it just scales.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's made to fall over. Right? The Chaos Monkey resistant MySQL instance that you can basically, if you need more bandwidth or you need more disk space, you need more simultaneous transactions, you just pay for it.
I don't like to just pay for it.
Yeah, but infinitely.
For software. I'll pay for hardware.
Infinitely. And
that's why I give away my software.
It's dirt freaking cheap. It's cheaper than all our other ones. 0.04. I think the other thing.
Cool.
So anyway, yes, you can hit it with Yog and it's all there.
Those Yog folks need to make something for Postgres.
Yeah, send an email.
You did?
No, but I can.
I'm sure they've received a few by now. They need to get on the ball, though. That would be cool if they made a product for Postgres.
Yeah, the big deal right now is monitoring.
I mean, because if the argument for MySQL Yog was to get away from the MySQL shell because it's cumbersome, the MySQL shell is light years ahead in terms of ease of use over the Postgres shell, and in my opinion, and I'm sure a lot of people will want to reach through the computer and kill me now for saying that, but how many different type of, you write a SQL statement and then it's like /q /whatever/cz. If you add two z's, it's different. Semicolon, what's wrong with that? Write a SQL statement, end it with a semicolon, hit the carriage return or the enter key, and done. The Postgres shell is it's got these cool escapes, as it were. So you write your SQL statement, and then you type in escape after it, and that, does stuff. Or if you want to show tables and stuff, instead of typing like show tables or describe table, it's like whack ZZX, and you're Googling like, how do I show tables in Postgres? That means that your show isn't good. If people are searching for this.
That's how you know something is technology. It requires a manual.
Yeah, things like show table or show databases, you can remember that, right?
Yeah, it must be.
So, but, okay, what was that in Postgres again? The Postgres shell. Dang. Yeah, it was like /QXZZ, or is it QZZX? I don't know. Oh, shoot. Darn it. I just did something bad, so.
Okay, Google. It heard me.
It did?
Yeah.
My phone probably did too.
It's tuned to me.
Well, we're done with the discussion about moves, obviously. We left that behind. Depending on interest, we can hit on that again next month. It was really, really basic crash course tonight, just talking about object-oriented fundamentals. If you join the discussion looking for something other than that crash course, then yeah, sorry, that wasn't what we did tonight. We can do that next month. If you're interested, send us an email. But otherwise, we'll adjust next month's itinerary based on popular demand or whatever folks want to talk about. Otherwise, and if folks don't express interest in learning more about moves, then I'm not going to spend my time there. I'll continue to work on the image for the hackathon and see what I can do about fixing that cooling issue on the server. Cool. Well, I want to thank everybody who came. Pratik also, thanks for coming. It's awesome to see you again this month. Is there anything you wanted to say on the broadcast before we close things down?
I'm good.
He's good. It looks like, did you take a picture of yourself and freeze it? It looks like
There is a way to disable the camera.
it looks like, but I still see that. It looks like you.
Let me turn off that's me now.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's the camera off.
But if you hit the camera off, it still shows you.
Yeah, that was really like
That's you in high school.
Oh, that's your profile?
Yeah.
Picture?
Yeah.
It looks like you're just sitting there at the monitor going, Okay. Well, thanks for stopping by, folks. I'm excited about the hackathon. I'm not excited about the time investment. I've been investing a lot of time in a lot of things lately, and I'd really like to get some sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is why I'm saying spring-ish on that. But we will soldier on.
IPv6, Perl 6 official release before Christmas.
Before Christmas.
It happens.
That's true.
Beta or
No.
Fiber?
GA.
Yay.
No.
Rapido, right?
So, yes, Perl 6 has dropped. Has dropped. So we might want to touch on that as a side topic next month, too. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll see you next month.